All right. Thank you, Maria. First of all, I'm going to apologize in advance because I have come down with a bad cold. And so my voice is a little bit iffy, particularly because I did have to lecture today. And my poor, long suffering students in 4440 had to listen to this voice for a long time, which was most unfortunate. So, apologies in advance. So tonight we're going to talk about personal statements. I know that you have already gotten some general guidance from Dr. Roop and that you have already gotten some discussion about who to get letters of recommendation from and what letters of recommendation can do for you from Dr. Bielefeld. So tonight we're going to turn to the topic of personal statements. And I don't plan to talk the whole time because I'd like to leave plenty of time for people to ask questions. Now, some of the names that are on here tonight, I recognize either from my class last year or because one or two of you are in my class right now, or a couple of you have just come to see me for whatever reason. So very nice to not see, but see names of people that I actually know. Also, some of you I know because you took 4440 from Victoria Sevich, and Victoria turns out to be my grad advisee. So we talk a lot about students. So good to see you all. So applying to grad school, first of all, those of you who are doing it this year have already realized that it is about as much work as taking a whole extra course, right? You probably figured that out. It is not only a whole pile of work, but it's also quite stressful. And you've also noticed that not every program is asking you to do exactly the same stuff. So some programs are still looking for that big general personal statement. Other programs, like Ohio State's, for example, have moved to specific prompt questions that they want you to write answers to. This makes, and oh, by the way, the different schools that have specific prompts don't all have the same specific prompts. And so just to make it even more complicated for you. And as you know, a lot is riding on how you write those personal statements. They are an element that is used by admissions committees in determining whether or not they want to invite you to come and join their program. So I'm going to talk about, I think I'll talk about some of the specific prompts first, and then we'll move to the general personal statement. So I don't know all the prompts from every school that any of you might be applying to because there's a bazillion different programs that you guys might be applying to. So I will talk first of all about the prompts in general. Before you sit down and write an answer to a specific prompt, think really hard about what it is they're asking you. So there used to be this prompt. Thank God it's gone away, but there used to be this prompt that we called the snowstorm question. And it went like this. You are a speech pathologist and you get up at 7 a.m. because you have an 8 a.m. client, but there has been a massive snowstorm. What do you do? And so all the students at first glance, they're like, oh, this is a question about me showing my dedication to the field of speech language pathology. So I would move heaven and earth to get to my client on time. Well, you know what? No, you wouldn't. And your actual what you would do is the right answer to the question, not the, oh, they expect me to talk about how dedicated I am to the profession. Of course, you're dedicated to the profession. This question isn't really about a snowstorm at all. It has nothing to do with a snowstorm. It has to do with you defining what is your logic process when confronted with an unexpected challenge. How do you organize yourself? So a good answer to the snowstorm question might be something like, well, first of all, I would gather data. I would find out how much snow is there? How bad are the roads? Is there a level 2 snow emergency? Those things would influence your decision. The second thing you might do is think hard about, and honestly, your jobs will be very important, but they are not important in anybody's life. So if it's dangerous for you to go and meet your client, it is probably equally dangerous for your client to come and meet you. So is whatever you're going to be providing them that day, is it really worth them risking their life or you risking your life? It's not brain surgery, right? It's speech language pathology. So the third thing you might say is, because I live in a city where snowstorms happen, I might set up a Zoom option in advance and say to people on the, hey, woke up, the snowstorm happened. Let's use the Zoom option today and let's meet on Zoom. Excuse me. Sorry about the cold. So what the question is asking you about is, what's your logic process? How do you collect data? How do you think of criteria that are going to be used in making your decision? And how do you move forward after you've made your decision? So thank God they don't ask the snowstorm question anymore, because it always made students crazy. But the advice, the general advice, which is try and figure out what they're actually asking you when they ask a question, is really good advice. So let's talk about some of Ohio State's prompts, because I know a lot of you do plan to apply to Ohio State. It may not be where you ultimately decide to go to school, but many of you do plan to apply to OSU. So one of our prompts talks about your exposure to people who have different lived experiences from you. Well, what does that mean? And they make it very clear, by the way, this is not a question about working with someone who has hearing impairment or working with someone who has a motor speech issue, right? It's not about speech language hearing issues. It's about people whose lives have been different from yours. So what experiences have you had with people whose lives have been different from yours? And have you actively sought out such experiences? Have you tried to learn about other cultures? Have you tried to learn about people from different socioeconomic levels? Have you tried to learn about people who are racially different from you? Have you tried to learn about people who are in an age category very different from you, like very old people? So the lived experience question really wants to know, what kind of experiences have you had, and what did you learn from them? What did you learn from them about yourself? And what did you learn from them about the other person? And how might you use what you've learned going forward in a career as an audiologist or a speech language pathologist? Now, this could be a little bit about your own lived experiences. For example, some of our students are first-gen students. No one in their family has ever gone to college before. I can guarantee you that their lived experiences have been very different from the vast majority of our undergraduates who come from families where the parents are college graduates and the students have had a lot of advantages coming through their high schools. But maybe your own lived experiences have been different. And you can write about how your experiences have been different from someone else's. And what did you learn? Maybe you're not a member of the quote majority, but you have to interact with the majority on a daily basis. How does that impact you? What have you learned from it? And how would you use what you've learned to go forward and be an outstanding speech language pathologist or audiologist? So that's the lived experience question. They really want to know, and you're going to hear a common theme, by the way, in almost all the questions that I talk about. It's the what did you learn from it? Okay, second question we have is how are you prepared for the rigorous academic and clinical duties that come with grad school? This question about the fact that grad school is like undergrad on steroids. You know, those of you that have taken my 44 to 40 class, you know that my class moves really, really fast. And we're very, very tough on you. And what I tell the students is, if you think this is fast, you ain't seen nothing yet. And you're going to have to juggle all these academic responsibilities and time in the clinic. And so how are you going to do that? So they want to know a little bit about academically, how do you approach your studies? You know, so if you know you have a huge exam coming up, what do you do? They want to know a little bit about your process. They also want to know how many things are you juggling right now? And are you good at it, right? Are you good at juggling multiple responsibilities? Some of the students in this class who are going to be graduating this year are working the equivalent of full-time jobs. Some of them are serving as caretakers for younger siblings or caring for an ill parent. Excuse me again. These are things that require you to have exquisite time management abilities. And so being able to talk about those things gives the people who are reading this essay an idea that, yeah, you've dealt with rigor before and you know how to do it. Third prompt is about describe a couple of instances where you've turned a negative situation into a positive learning experience, and were there any positive outcomes as a result of it? This is a question about how do you face adversity? That's really what this question is about. It's the resilience question, right? There are a lot of resilience questions out there on most of the grad school applications. There's a resilience question. Have you ever failed at something? And what did you do as a result of that? Did someone in some situation, were there ever huge roadblocks thrown in your way? And what did you do about it? How did you turn it into a positive? So I will tell you that once when I was applying for a job, I was interviewing with a bunch of people, and one of them sat down with me and said, about a situation where I was trying to get two people who were at very different points to come together in a compromise. And I tried everything. I pulled out all the stops. And in the end, I was unsuccessful. And I said to her at the end, it probably seems weird to you that I would tell you about a situation where I actually failed. That's not what most people in job interviews do. But here's why I did it. I want to tell you what I learned as a result of that and how I have put that learning to use in other situations. So it's okay to talk about things you tried that didn't work, but to talk about what you learned from it. So again, that what did you learn from it? It just keeps coming up. And there's a reason for that, by the way. The people reading your essays, they're all academics, right? They're like me. We always want to know what you learned. We're professors. So what did you learn? The final prompt for Ohio State is a grab bag prompt. Comment on something else that you didn't get a chance to talk about already that is relevant to your application for grad school. So this could be some situation you were in. This could be some club you belong to. This could be a whole lot of things. It could be talking about a personal challenge you had to overcome. This one could be a whole lot of different things. So that's what our prompts are like. And what I'm going to talk about next is more about general personal statements. But what I say about the general personal statements, a lot of it is going to apply to writing the prompt responses. And so let's start with some general advice. The first thing I would say is there's a lot of advice out there on how to write your personal statement for grad school. Almost all of it is bad. It's almost all bad advice. Most of it you do not want to follow. Two things in particular that you do not want to follow. One is spend a lot of time telling people how great you are. Focus on your positive qualities. Hey, look at me. I excel at time management. Hey, look at me. I excel at interpersonal interactions. I will tell you that most of you probably don't want to write that. And in fact, trying to write down sentences like that makes your stomach knot up. I know it would mine, but for most of you, it makes your stomach like tie up in knots when you have to write about how great you are. So here's a piece of good advice. Always listen to your stomach. Never ignore your stomach. Your stomach is telling you truth. You don't want to write that stuff. We don't want to read that stuff. So let's talk about what that means. Whenever you write anything, always realize that you are writing it for an audience. And when you're writing, you always have to keep the reader in mind. Who is your reader? Who is your audience? Well, your audience are the people on the grad admissions committee. They are mostly professors like me. And they don't want to see you trying to puff yourself up and talk about how great you are. And when I describe this difference to people, I talk about the difference between business people on the one hand and academics on the other hand. And you can see the difference in the differences in the type of resumes we write. So, business people, resumes, full of verbs. I managed this. I oversaw this. I supervised this. I challenged this. I overcame this, right? Verb, 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 all kinds of verbs. Academic resumes, also known as vitas, are all nouns. They have no verbs in them anywhere. So it'll say title of position, location, years. Title of position, location, years. Never a description of what you did in that position, which seems kind of weird, but that's the way they work. You get to the part with it looks like an APA reference, right? Author's names, year, title of article, name of journal, volume, pages, period. No description of what the article's about, what the project was about. Grants, that category, agency that funded it, title of the proposal, name of the PI, period of support, dollar amount, how much money. Never a description of the project. There are no verbs anywhere in an academic resume. Well, I tell you that because it tells you something about academics. Academics are people of the noun, while business people are people of the verb. Academics, as people of the noun, we believe that our accomplishments should speak for themselves. And if we have to spend a lot of time doing this, there may be something suspect about them. So it goes along with your gut telling you not to write these sentences about how great you are. Now, this is a little bit confusing because you actually do have to get some of your best accomplishments in there. But how do you do it? Well, the way you do it is all about tone. It's the tone in which you write it. So instead of, I'm great because I'm doing undergraduate research in Dr. X's lab, it's more about the opportunity to get involved in Dr. X's research lab has been something I will ever be grateful for because it has taught me so many things. So if you think about that sentence, what does it say? It says, hey, look at me, I'm doing research, without actually coming out and saying it that way. It says, what a great opportunity I had. I'm so grateful for it. It's a much more humble tone. There's a definite humility there. And it talks about what you learned from it, because again, we always want to know what you learned from it. So tone is really, really important. Now, I will say an aside here, which is that stuff I said about resumes and vitas, you still should put together a resume. And your resume for grad school should look like a business resume. It can have all those verbs in it. Your resume is a separate document. Your resume is where you can put all the things you have done. You can list them all. Which leads me to the one really good piece of advice that is out there about grad school. And that is, in your personal essay, do not write your resume. And it's like, well, duh. Yeah, because you have the opportunity to upload a resume. And you should absolutely take advantage of that opportunity. I was talking to Sarah, our grad coordinator in the department, and she said, you'd be surprised how many students don't upload a resume onto the CITCAS site. And I was astonished. It's like, why wouldn't you upload a resume? You absolutely should upload a resume, and it should look like a business resume, because that's where you get to describe the positions that you held and what your duties were and all of that. But the advice about personal statements where they say, don't write your resume, they basically mean, don't just make your personal statement a list of all the things you've done. And there's a good reason for that too. And it has to do with your audience, the person who's reading your essay. Remember that in big programs, we get a lot of applicants. And every person on the admissions committee might have to read as many as several hundred applications. That's a lot of applications. So you want your personal statement to be written as something memorable, so that when the person is done, they step away from your essay and say, oh yeah, Jane Doe, she's the one who, and then they can fill in that blank, as opposed to, oh yeah, Jane Doe, she did a whole lot of stuff and I actually can't remember what any of it is. So you do not use your personal statement as a place to write everything that's in your resume. You do not have to talk about everything you've ever done because it's in your actual resume. So humility of tone, talk about what you learned as a result of some of the experiences that you have had. But don't write about all of them. Pick a judicious selection for the general personal essay. The other thing that's true about the general personal essay, and those of you that have been in my 4440 class will know, I think everything's a story. You know, I teach hearing science as a story, right? Starts out, once upon a time, there was a sound, and there's a plot, and there are characters, and most of the characters have Latin names, and the story is the structure that holds all the content information together. And we do it that way because the story helps the person who is learning it to consolidate that knowledge and remember it way after the course ends. So your personal essay has to accomplish something similar in that the person who is reading it needs to be able to say, oh yeah, Jane Doe, she's the one who. So when I talk about the fact that your personal statement has to be a story, I don't really mean a story like the first time I saw little Johnny's cochlear implant turned on and his eyes sparkled, right? It's not that kind of story. It is a story in the sense that it has a theme. The theme is expressed in the first paragraph. The subsequent paragraphs reinforce that theme. And the last paragraph, where you talk about what you want to do in the long term of your career and how grad school is going to help you get there, all of it relates back to the theme of the whole thing. So you choose experiences from your list of things you have done that reinforce that theme. So a couple of themes that don't really fly because they're what I call table stakes. I always wanted a career where I could just help people. Well, yeah, if you don't want a career where you can help people, you are going into the wrong field. So that is not a great theme, that you just want to help people. Everybody wants to help people. It's what's called table stakes in poker. It's the stuff you put in before you even get to play. So table stakes, of course you want to help people. So in thinking about what your story is, I'll give you a few examples of students I have worked with over the years. And I have worked with literally hundreds of students to help them craft a general personal statement and craft their own story. So it's hard for you maybe to know what your story is because you're in the middle of living it every day. You know, when you're doing it day by day by day, it's hard for you to see what the themes are that tie your life together. Sometimes I ask students about how they got interested in speech and hearing in the first place. And once I had a student who came to see me, and she was saying, well, you know, I was interested in linguistics and I sort of switched over to speech and hearing because it's more practical application. That's not really much of a story. And I said, yeah, it's true. It's not a great story. Tell me why you're interested in linguistics. And she said, well, you know, it started probably when I was in high school. I got really interested in languages. And I said, so why did you get interested in languages? And she said, well, it may have been because I was brought to the United States from Russia at the age of 10 and dropped into the Columbus public school system, speaking very little English. And I'm thinking, how could you not know that that's your story, right? That's how you got interested in languages in the first place. And the communication barrier that you experienced because you didn't speak a lot of English and nobody around you spoke any Russian, that's probably what got you interested in communication disorders in the first place. And as we talked, she went, oh, I guess I do have a story. So don't ignore things that may have happened in your life that may contribute to your story, even if you think they're not necessarily related. A couple of years ago, I had a student who came in and she said, well, I don't know what to tell you about what I do outside of speech and hearing. My other major is dance. And I said, okay. And she said, that's not related to speech and hearing at all. And I said, really? You think it's not? And she said, well, how could it be? And I said, when you are dancing a piece in front of an audience, what are you trying to do? And she said, well, I'm trying to communicate something to them. And I said, play that back and listen to yourself. And she went, oh my God, right? I engage in dance as a different type of communication. So the two things are related. And so we sort of worked through when she choreographs, what is it she's trying to convey? How does having these two majors that are so different make her have discipline in her daily life? And so you'd be surprised the things that might turn out to be relevant. Quite recently, I was talking to a student who's part of your class this year. She's not on tonight. And you know the story that she told? It was about doing crochet, which is a huge part of her life. In fact, I was telling her recently that I had to lead a discussion for the book club I'm in on a book called Remarkably Bright Creatures, where one of the main characters happens to be an octopus. She came in the next day and gave me this. She had crocheted an octopus, and she expresses herself using crochet. And that turned out to be the theme that held everything else together in her essay. So don't ignore things that are in your life that maybe don't sound like speech and hearing at all, but they are defining of you. I've had students who were athletes talk about what they do in the pursuit of their sport and how that translates into what a clinician does. I've had students who have had to overcome serious illness, and they talk about their experiences as a patient in the medical system and how that has energized them to want to provide good clinical care. I've had students who talk about, instead of saying, hey, be sorry for me because I had to work full time because I'm funding my own education, I've had them talk about the value of that. So, like last year, I worked with a student who wanted to work in my lab, but honestly, pay for research assistants is crappy compared to what you can make as the head barista at a Starbucks. And so she came to me and she said, I really want to work for you, but I have to make enough money to pay my tuition, and Starbucks is paying me $21 an hour to be the head barista. So we talked about her job as the head barista. And I said, has it ever intersected with speech and hearing? And she said, well, there was this deaf couple who came in who wanted to order, and the barista who was waiting on them was getting really impatient with them. And she just kept talking louder and louder and louder to them when it became very clear that they couldn't understand the barista at all. So she said, well, I went over and I stepped in and I only knew a few signs, but I signed, hi, my name is, and their faces lit up. And then she simply got a piece of paper and a pen and she wrote, what would you like to order? And they wrote down what they wanted. And so that inspired her to go out and enroll in sign language classes. And she talked about the fact that when they came back in one day, a couple months later, she was able to sign a couple of entire sentences to them, and they were so gratified. So she talked about communication and how that difficulty in communication in her work life was something she was able to address, and the feeling it gave her about how much she wanted to go on and help people with communication issues. So you never know what it's going to be in your life that is going to be the thing, the hook that is your theme for your personal statement. And you would be honestly surprised to know that many of the other things you do feed up into that theme. So, if your theme is X, how does my experience working in a research lab feed up into that? What have I learned working in the research lab that is relevant to that? What have I learned in doing volunteer work, working at a summer camp? What have I learned that feeds up into that theme? And then finally, when you get to the last paragraph, what is it that you want to do going forward? And how does that theme that you started with in the first paragraph, how has it prepared you? How did it actually create the path that you followed to get to the point where you are now? And when you start thinking about your essay that way, two things happen. The first thing that happens is your gut kind of unclenches and your stomach doesn't hurt anymore. That's really important. Again, my stomach's very important to me. Your stomach should be important to you. But the other thing that happens is if you've thought about it right, you're actually excited to sit down and write that essay. And you get kind of a personal satisfaction out of telling your story that way. So think about that. What might my theme be? What is my story? Because when you write your essay that way, like I guarantee you that the people who read the crochet essay, they will not read another one that is about crochet. And it will absolutely make that student memorable to the audience who is reading it. Okay, just a couple of last things. If you write the big personal essay first, you often can cannibalize it for schools that have specific prompts. You will often find stuff in your essays that you can use to answer some of the specific prompts. So it doesn't hurt to write the big one first. And remember the general pieces of advice. Write with gratitude and humility for the experiences that you've had. Talk about what you learned and how it is going to help you going forward as a graduate student, but then in the long term as a clinician. Don't write the statement, I will be a great asset to your program, right? There are a lot of pieces of advice out there about you have to write about why you're going to be a great asset to their program. If you write this essay the right way, it's going to be obvious why you are going to be a great asset to their program. You don't have to come out and write it. And it's actually better if you don't, because it doesn't sound very humble. So a couple of last things. If you have some stuff in your past that you need to explain, because some of us do, some of us had a really bad semester, and then all the other semesters were good. There could be a really good explanation for why you had one bad semester. I believe my academic preparation has been very strong, with the exception of one bad semester where I broke my leg in 4 places at the beginning of the semester, spent 6 weeks in the hospital and had to undergo multiple surgeries, and had to relearn how to walk. And so I was focused on things other than my academics that semester. And I'm actually telling you a story from my life. I was in a bad car accident. I broke everything. I didn't walk for 4 months. I had to relearn how to walk. It was interesting. Not a thing I would recommend, but it might have explained why perhaps my teaching performance wasn't as good as it could have been, because teaching from a wheelchair is different from teaching standing up. Didn't hurt my SEIs. I think I got the sympathy vote because of all the casts, and I'd fractured my wrist and I couldn't write. And yeah, so I got the sympathy vote from the students, but I knew it wasn't my finest hour. So if you've got something that is a good explanation, but also what did you learn from that? I learned that I had to pull on my deep reserves to overcome adversity in order to be successful. So if the thing you have to explain is a bad grade in calculus or a bad grade in chemistry, don't do it. Leave that to the people that are writing your recommendation letters. You don't want to sit there and say, oh, feel sorry for me because I'm just not good at math, or I'm just not good at chemistry. Those are not things you really want to say in a grad school application, because we kind of expect you to be good at a lot of things when you come to grad school. So don't spend a lot of time pointing at things you weren't good at, unless you can tell a story about what you learned from that and how you have put it to good use subsequently. Okay, anything else? Oh, one last thing. There's one other really bad piece of advice out there. And it talks about how when you write, you have to paint a dramatic picture. So there's this one, and I literally did read this once in an advice book for grad applications. And it said, here's a ho-hum statement. I decided to go to med school to become an emergency room doctor after I was in a car accident and had to experience the emergency room myself. And they said, oh, don't write that. And I thought, why not? That's actually kind of interesting. They said, instead, write the doctor's feet, the emergency room doctor's feet left red footprints in the floor as she wheeled my gurney down the hallway, for she had stepped in my blood. And I thought, oh my God, nobody wants to write that and nobody wants to read it. So don't get too dramatic when you write, quote, this story. Don't get too dramatic. The first statement, I decided to pursue a career in emergency medicine after I was in a car accident and had my own experience in the emergency room. That's not a bad opening statement. And then you have to talk about, what did I learn as a result of being a patient in the emergency room? And what does that have to say about how I want to treat patients when I'm an emergency doctor? So it's all about tone. It's all about the things you write, how you write about them, and what you learned. Talk with humility. Don't write your resume. Tell a story. Try and be memorable in a good way. And that is all I have to say. So I will take questions if people have questions. And you can use the raise hand function. You can type them in the chat. I don't know, Maria, do you have anything in the chat?
No, I actually don't.
Okay, but I'm here. I can take questions if you want to ask about your own situation. If you want to be brave and ask about it in front of other people, I guarantee you other people are thinking some of the same questions that you have. Emma, you have your hand up.
Hi,
Hi,
um,
Emma.
I had a question for when you like write about the experiences you've had or
Mhm.
something that you learned from or challenges you face. Would you say it has like a time frame of like maybe like, oh, I faced this when I was in elementary school, or would that be like too far back and you should focus on more present?
Not at all. The experiences that we had back in grade school probably helped shape how we are today. I mean, you'd be amazed at how our grade school experiences and our high school experiences have turned us into the person that we are today. And if it was something impactful, some challenging situation that you faced, it may have changed the whole rest of your life. And you probably learned something really important from it. So it can go back. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a very good question, by the way.
I have a quick question about like length of personal statement. Is there like kind of a like 1 page, 2 page, or do you have any advice on that? Because I haven't really seen or heard anything about that.
Okay, check first of all with the specific school and whether they have a character or page limit. But I would say this, 1 page is good. 2 pages might be even better for a personal statement. If you're going more than 3, that's probably TMI, right? That's more than you want to tell them, and it's more than they want to know about you. Again, remember, they're reading hundreds of these, and if you write a 5-page personal statement, they're going to be going, oh, wait, there's more, really? And so, yeah, be solicitous, be considerate of your reader. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much.
You bet. All right, what else we got? Other questions?
There's one in the chat. To what degree are we expected to include specific information regarding the program we are applying to in our personal essays and responses? Some of the programs I'm looking at encourage students to check their website and include those details, but I am unsure how to go about that.
That's a really good question. So on Sidcasts, if you're uploading your information to Sidcasts and there's not a separate application for a specific school, then you don't want to talk about any specific school in your essay. But if you are writing an essay for a school that's not on Sidcasts, or if you're writing an essay for the supplemental app and they ask you that question, they honestly want to know, why us? Why did you want to come to our program? So I would hope that as you put your list of schools together that you plan to apply to, that you've got a really good answer to that question for every school that's on your list. Why am I applying to this school? Now, sometimes the answer is not something you want to write, which is, you're my safety school, right? You totally don't want to write that. You don't want to write, I'm only applying to schools in Ohio because I want to keep my tuition costs down, right? That's not a good answer either. But the schools that you are deciding to apply to, spend some time on their website. Find out if they offer specializations. Find out if the faculty there are, because if you go and look up the individual faculty, it will talk about what they work on. Because the faculty all of us are doing research on things. And if there's a faculty member there who's doing research on something that is absolutely fascinating to you, by all means, talk about, I wanted to apply to the University of X because you have a specialization in bilingual speech language pathology, and I hope to be a bilingual speech language pathologist. Or I was talking to a student earlier this year who plans to apply to Northwestern because Northwestern may be the best school in the country to go to if you want to study swallowing disorders. Although I will tell you, we have a brand new faculty member who specializes in swallowing disorders. And so our program is about to expand. Similarly, by the way, we've hired 2 new faculty members who are coming in January who are going to help stand up our bilingual speech language pathology program. So if you are interested in either swallowing or bilingual, stay tuned because our program is about to expand in both of those directions. So I think that's super exciting. The swallowing faculty member, Chala Kantarsajil, is already here. She's a delight. She is wonderful. She needs a little time to get her lab set up, but she's going to be in the saddle good to go. So if you are interested in either of those 2 things and you said, well, I'm not going to look at Ohio State because they don't have a program, just stay tuned. But absolutely, if you want to focus on pediatric motor speech disorders. And the programs you are applying to, if there is someone there who works on pediatric motor speech disorders, absolutely talk about it. You know, the statements that you might make about programs like, I am applying to the University of Pittsburgh because the program is outstanding across the board and I haven't decided what I want to specialize in yet. Maybe a true statement, but it doesn't tell people about you the same way that talking about a particular specialty. Now, if it's in your general personal statement, see if you can say something about your interest in that specialty up under the theme and in some of the paragraphs, because then it'll just come out at the end. It's like, well, of course they're applying to our university given what they wrote about. So think about ways to make everything connect back so that at the end you can just tie it up with a bow. Okay, so definitely check out the websites of every school you're applying to. Look up whether they offer specialty tracks. Look up whether there are faculty there who are doing research on topics that you are very interested in, because those faculty are likely teaching in the graduate program, and there's probably ways for you to learn about whatever that topic is if you go to that school. Okay. Chloe, that was a really good question, by the way. Other questions? All right. Going once, going twice. Anybody? Any last requests? That's what I always say when I give exams, by the way. Any last requests? Well, guys, thank you for tuning in tonight. I wish you all very, very good luck with your grad applications. Again, we know just how hard these things are to do and how much work it takes. It's not easy, but I guarantee you that the time you put into it will, first of all, be worth it, because the better your application looks, the more likely you are to get admitted to a grad program. But also, the process of writing this personal essay, you can actually learn things about yourself that are valuable as you go forward. And so you might find it sort of an interesting self journey as you write about it too. All right, so good luck, everybody. I'm going to sign off. If you have other questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm Weisenberger.21.
Thanks
Okay,
so much, Dr. Weisenberger, and I hope you get to have some rest and rest your voice too and feel better.
Yeah. I'm hoping so too, because I hate subjecting my students to this terrible voice. All right, everybody, have a great evening. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.